welcome back to the desk corner, and welcome to a new colored pencil video. And I haven't done one of these in a while, but I was working on this toucan last week, and I thought a really good video idea would be to talk about how you can make your colored pencil art pop out of the page more, because I think a lot of people feel like sometimes their colored pencil art can fall flat and things like that in comparison to working with something like graphite or charcoal, where you only have to worry about value. With colored pencil, you have to worry about the colors as well, and it just makes everything more difficult. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys some of my past artwork and talk a little bit about a few things I did to make those drawings pop, and then I'm also going to go through and talk a little bit about how I created this drawing and give a few tips for how I made this one pop as well. So with colored pencil, a lot of people get caught up in the specific colors and the range of colors they think they need for a specific drawing, but people tend to not focus as much on the values when you're just starting out with colored pencil. And what I mean by this is you want to make sure that your values are dark enough in certain areas and you have a nice contrast between your shadows and your highlights, and you're not just using different colors and thinking that the colors themselves are somehow going to make everything look realistic, because in reality, which I'm going to show later in some of my artwork, you can use colors that aren't really realistic to what you're drawing and still make the artwork look realistic because of the values. So I will show you guys examples because I don't think talking about it is doing justice. So let's look at these eye drawings. The first one I did in 2014 with my Prismacolors. I think that was when I first got my Prismacolors. And the second one I did in 2019 with my Polychromos. Now the type of pencil doesn't really matter here. What I do want to talk about though is some of the differences and things I learned between this drawing and this drawing. And I don't want to focus too much on technique, because when you're starting out with drawing, obviously you have to improve on your technique, but there are a couple things I could have done even in this drawing when my technique wasn't as great to make this look better and more realistic, even if my skills weren't as on par as they were in 2019. In the first eye drawing, the skin is very one-dimensional. I was pretty much just using a peach color because the skin looked light. I didn't really realize that you could mix in other colors above the crease of the eye and in other shadowed areas. As you can see here, for the dark areas of the iris, I just used a dark blue. But in this one, I didn't just use a dark green for the darker areas here. I incorporated some deeper grays as well as some grayish blue tone to really get it as dark as I would like it to. I also used sepia in the crease of the eye and even a little bit of black. And in the skin tone, even though the skin tone is still a light skin tone, I used a couple of different browns to bring out where the shadowed areas are, and it still looks like a lighter skin tone. And in this one, I thought that if you wanted to do a lighter skin tone, you pretty much could only use like a light peach color, which is not true. Another thing is that this drawing looks a bit fuzzy because my pencils weren't sharp enough when I was, working on the eyelashes and other details, whereas in this drawing, I started out with the underlayers, but then when I got to the detailed areas, I made sure my pencil was really sharp so that I could get those extremely fine lines that you see with the eyebrows, the eyelashes, and even some of the finer details in the white of the eye and on the skin. So let's move on to a different example where I talk more about not using as many colors or having a smaller range of colors and how you could still create realistic and dimensional art with that. So this is an older drawing from 2014. I think that it was pretty decent. The proportions are okay and it looks pretty realistic, but it's lacking the dimension and the values, as I was talking about before, that would really make it look realistic. And then if you compare it to this drawing, which is a little bit more recent, I didn't date it apparently, so I'm not sure when it's from. It's a bit more recent though. I swatched the colors that I used in the drawing up here. Those are the only 5 colors that I had used, and I was still able to get those values and that dimension in this drawing. That's because I figured out how I could mix some of the colors to get a dark value for the shadowed areas, and I also figured out how I could make sure I do a nice transition between those shadowed areas and the highlighted areas. And because of that, I think that this drawing, even though I only used 5 colors, actually came out looking better and more realistic and more dimensional in 3D than this drawing did, even though I had so many more colors to work with in this drawing. And just to add another bonus tip in, you can see that I'm using a tanned paper in this, and sometimes when you want your colored pencil art to pop, one thing you can try is using different colored papers. So toned tan is a great one like this. Toned gray is a thing. You can use toned blue even, or other off-white colors if you want it to be more subtle, because you don't always want your paper to be bright white, because sometimes if you want your white or other highlights to stand out more, it's better to have a more neutral paper to work with. So that's another tip I have if you are wanting to try something new and you're tired of just using the white paper. I do want to show you guys one more example here. So this is a flower I did in 2017, and I had only used a couple of colors from my small, at the time, polychromos set. This is a flower I did in 2020. So at first glance, these look pretty similar, and there's not too much of a difference. They both have really vibrant, pretty colors. This one is still well blended, and the colors are nice and bright, and they do pop out. But there is a big difference if you look closely between this one and that one. And the difference, although subtle, is that in this flower drawing, I actually used a sepia, which is my sepia. Look how small that is because of how often I use it in my realistic work to get my values deep enough. But I used sepia in this one in some of the darkest areas. Now I didn't want it to overpower the flower. That sounds okay. No. I didn't want my brown tones to muddy up all of these really pretty vibrant colors, so I just really carefully went in and only added it in some of those detailed areas and nooks and crannies, and then of course down here to mix with the green for the stem. But that little touch really helps this flower to look a little bit more 3D. But you can see for this flower, since I had only used kind of a mid-tone blue, it was still a deep blue, but it wasn't deep enough to kind of add in those extra shadows, and I didn't try to mix in any deeper colors here where the petals meet, and there's some nooks and crannies here, and then of course the side of the stem there's some nooks and crannies. And if I had just used a darker color to increase my value in those areas, the flower would look so much more three-dimensional. And that's kind of my point with all of this, you guys. I hope that this makes sense so far. I know that this doesn't have to do with the flowers here, but I do want to show you guys this pumpkin that I did, and I used sepia and some black for these creases. And if I hadn't done that, I just left it with dark orange for the shadowed areas, it just wouldn't look as realistic and it would have fallen flat more. But what really made this look more realistic was deepening up the shadows as much as I needed to, and also making sure that my highlights could stand out as well. You can see that there's highlights on each little section of the pumpkin, and they're not necessarily even bright white, they're kind of just lighter than the rest of the areas that I colored. So that's just something to kind of think about with colored pencil. Even if you're doing something that's relatively, I guess, simple, not many colors, you're just using a couple different reds or oranges or blues, like a flower or something like that, don't underestimate the power of deepening up some areas to really increase the value in those areas and overall create more contrast and depth in your drawings. This can just be something that is a lifesaver for a lot of your drawings. So now let me show you guys more of a demonstration as I worked on this really gorgeous toucan. And I have a couple of tips from this drawing specifically that I could share with you guys. First of all, I don't know if it shows up on camera, but I'm using a toned paper in this as well. If I hold up this white paper next to it, you can definitely see that this is more of a cream color. So I just have a paper pad that has a couple of different tones, and they're very off-white and neutral colors. But that was one of the tips I suggested to you guys earlier, was if you're having trouble bringing out your highlights a lot, then you might want to try working on a more toned paper, not a bright white. So it's a little bit hard when you're working on a drawing that has a lot of black in it. The toucan had black feathers and a lot of its body was black, so what I did was I created some blue and magenta undertones in different areas, and then I layered the black on top. In some of those areas I left lighter so that there was more of a highlight, and it doesn't fall as flat because of that. And again, you're not going to see all of it when you cover up with the black on top, but you're going to see the highlighted areas, and sometimes it's going to peek through a bit, make areas look warmer or cooler, and that really helps to make your drawing look more realistic overall. Another thing is I wanted to build up the value underneath. I don't know what area of the bird to call this, but I'm going to say the bird's like chest area, I don't know, because the beak was creating somewhat of a shadow here. And so what I did was I actually used solvent when you don't want to press hard right away and ruin the tooth of the paper right away because you want to be able to add layers later. What helps is to not use a lot of pressure and blend out with solvent for the first maybe 1 or 2 layers, and that way you're able to continue deepening up your color without necessarily pressing hard and just ruining the tooth of the paper, which won't allow you to be able to add more layers. This is especially helpful when your paper is a little bit more on the smooth side and you don't have a ton of tooth to work with to begin with. I was also making sure that I left a highlight where there was a highlighted area, even if it wasn't bright white. I used cream color, I believe. Now with the beak, I actually darkened it up more than I saw in my reference photo, and I added some more brown to the pointy part in areas like that because I just wanted it to stand out a little bit more. And sometimes you follow your reference photo and you realize that even though it looks accurate, you don't think that your drawing is dark enough in some areas, so don't be afraid to darken up those areas, and it's not going to ruin the realism of the work. It's actually going to help it pop out a little bit more, even if you don't think it looks like that in your reference photo. So that's what I did for the beak. I also mixed together some blue and magenta and red colors to make more of a purple, or really deep dark purple in some areas. And that's another way you can reduce the amount of pencils you use, is by mixing a couple of colors too, to get some of, like, let's say you wanted a purple, you can mix the blue and magenta or red or whatever it is. You don't necessarily need to have a huge set of colors, as long as you have some of the main ones that you can use to mix other colors. Now you can always use backgrounds in your colored pencil art, but in this particular drawing I just wanted the toucan to stand out so much that I didn't really want to do too much with the background or the branch that he is sitting or standing on. So I made sure that I didn't add too many extra details to the branch. I still want to deepen up my values and make sure it looks realistic, but I didn't add too many extra details to that because I really just wanted the bird to be the main focus. But you can incorporate some other things in the background without ruining the focus of your drawing, as long as you don't add too many details or make it look too sharp. You want it to look a little more blurry or dull in comparison to the main subject of your drawing. That's another reason I don't always do colored pencil backgrounds, because it is really a struggle sometimes to make sure that the background doesn't overpower or even match what the subject is, because then everything just mixes together and the eye doesn't know where to focus. So if you're new to colored pencil, I wouldn't really recommend that you start out with backgrounds necessarily, unless they're very subtle or not anything too complicated. That's all for today's video, you guys. I don't know how long it's been at this point. I'm gonna try to edit it down a little bit, but I hope that these tips were helpful for you guys. And I wanted to show you examples that were not overly complicated pieces or overly detailed pieces, so that I could just be a little more clear and get my point across with what I was trying to explain. I know that this was more of a broad, kind of general overview type of video, so if you guys have any comments or questions or anything, don't be afraid to leave them down in the comment section below and I will get back to you. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you also like this toucan drawing that I did, because I do love drawing birds, as you guys probably know. And with that, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye guys!